WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We're going to try to remain positive around here. I made the mistake actually of running out and getting some food after the game on Sunday and listening to phone calls. So that won't be happening here. But Luke Jones will be here momentarily. We're doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. We're taking it out on the road. Brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with Window Nation and Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. We're going to be at Costas on Tuesday this week. We're going to be at Pappas in Parkville next week, just before the holiday. As we get into this, we got a big football game on Thursday night as well here this week. And I had a wonderful conversation with Matt Campbell, who is the Baltimore Convention Center chief. You can't say chief, executive director of the Convention Center. Bill Cole came down with us. Also, Jeff Ratnow talking about the future of the Inner Harbor. I've also made great inroads into this Maryland Stadium Authority situation, and had Neil DeMoss on from Field of Schemes. So you'll listen to all that. Even had an anthropologist on this week. So kind of tough to top John Waters, anthropologists, and Bill Cole, of course. But Luke Jones is going to try to do that and put into perspective something that, look, man, we've been at this a long time. There have been some bad beats. There have been some bad playoff beats. We've been aghast at various situations. And one thing around here, we don't get beat 37-3 often around here or like that. But these snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, I mean, it's easy to say they could be 10-0 right now, but they're not. Luke Jones joins us now to discuss all things Land of Cleve and Browns comebacks to beat the Ravens in Baltimore. I don't know that we've seen much quite like what happened on Sunday, and it is a little harrowing, and it does make you think, like, this team got it or what? Because that was awful.
Uh, the one thing I'll say, Nestor, is look, it hasn't happened much against the Browns, but this has happened way too much the last couple years, though. Indianapolis, Pittsburgh this year, go back to last year, Miami, Buffalo, the Giants, Jacksonville, Pittsburgh in week 17. I mean, we talked about this a lot earlier in the year, and a 4-game winning streak and how great they looked over the last month. You would hope that maybe they had gotten past this, especially having beaten Detroit so handily, having beaten Seattle so handily, winning in London, all of that. But this is a very alarming part of their identity that they just have not been able to shake. And let's be very clear. This has been an excellent football team for large, long stretches of time. And we just saw it over the last month. I mean, they look like the best team in football. But when things go sideways, and to your point, maybe it would be a little bit easier if they would just lose in a more conventional way, or they would just be bad from start to finish from time to time, like some teams are. But they have this incredible way of just completely giving games away, for lack of a better term. I mean, whether it's a crucial mistake, some bad luck, as was the case with the pick six on the deflected pass, the defense, which had been the much more consistent, more dynamic, outstanding side of the football. We've seen offensive lapses over the course of the season, but the defense had been so consistent, and it just fell apart in the second half. So it's one of those where you struggle to find words for just how disappointing, how shocking it was. But in other ways, unfortunately, it's not that shocking, because this has happened too many times over the last couple years. And look, they're still in great shape. They're the number 2 team in the AFC, which is what they were going into Sunday. I mean, Jacksonville loses, Cincinnati loses. So they win on Thursday night against Cincinnati. We'll talk about that because it's such a quick turnaround. They're fine. They really are fine if they beat the Bengals on Thursday night. But every single time this happens, it makes it that much more difficult to trust this team to really be that serious Super Bowl contender, because they look great when they're at their best. But when things start to get hairy, when things go sideways, you see what we saw on Sunday, which was really, really ugly. I mean, Jekyll and Hyde is an understatement when you kind of look at this football team in terms of how they've lost games this year and last year. So until they stop doing that, I mean, it's just it's just in the back of your mind at this point in time. And you try not to overreact. because they still are in excellent shape and they still are a really good football team. But for whatever reason, and we've talked about this over and over and over, they just they get in these spots and they refuse to be great because they have these games that they should win probabilities through the roof, and they've got a two-score lead in the fourth quarter again, and they can't finish it off, and they have breakdowns across the board, and even their very best players, like Lamar Jackson, for example, can't get them out of it when things start to go sideways. It's a collective effort then. So it's a very frustrating feeling. And I think, Justin Matabike said it best after the game. I mean, he was flat out asked at the podium, in the interview room, how he was feeling. And a lot of these guys will reach for the cliches, the coach speak, the things that they're supposed to say. He was very honest in saying, look, Kyle Hamilton returns the pick six on the second play from scrimmage. Keaton Mitchell scores. We're up 14-0 inside 5 minutes into the game. No one thought we were going to lose. And he was just saying what everyone was thinking at that point in time, but they did. And it's just, as you said, the way they snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, it is very deflating in that moment because you see how great this team can be, but these types of performances are holding them back from being great. And in a big picture sense, as we're thinking about playoffs in January and all those things, and we can think about those things because you and I aren't playing, these are the kind of losses that cost them seeding. These are the kind of losses that make the difference of playing at home as opposed to going on the road. And it's very, very disappointing for this football team when you look at their three losses, and you just said it. They very well could, probably should be 10-0, but they're not. And that's why it's difficult to fully embrace, fully trust them as a top shelf elite Super Bowl contender because this keeps happening. And it's really difficult to explain why it keeps happening, but it's a very frustrating part of the Baltimore Ravens now going back a few years.
Well, Luke, I would say this for their health the last couple of weeks was something that allowed me to believe more, right? Like a fully healthy team. It was never fully going to be healthy. We talk about Dobbins and losing him early on, but seeing Beckham come back, see Bateman be effective, see Marlon Humphrey get back on the field, see Ronnie Stanley get back, not look so good. I thought he looked really slow early in the game, or maybe Myles Garrett just looks that fast when he lined up on that side. There were a couple times, including the Keaton Mitchell run, where Myles Garrett's getting up the field and Keaton Mitchell was getting behind him early in the game. And then that front four seemed to like sort of clamp down a little bit and played the game differently. I know Jim Schwartz very, very well. He takes these Baltimore games as a whole different level of tenacity, and certainly in the division. He hasn't been in this division in 20 years, right? But I know that 28-3 thing didn't sit well there. And I think we all look at this division and say there's huge separation. We like to think the Ravens are so much because we look at Pittsburgh and we're like, look at their quarterback. We look at Cincinnati and say, well, I mean, their offensive line was always kind of civvy and they have the special quarterback, but they lose a lot of games as well. They don't run a clean schedule, clearly, as we can look on Sunday and see that they burped themselves again and put themselves in a position to have to go play on the road if they lose here in January, right? Like winning the division feels further away. They got some help from Cleveland, but I look at his Cleveland team and I'm thinking they're not half bad. Like, as I look at it, I feel a lot differently about them with Deshaun Watson. But we all think that this team should be so much better, and they don't get blown out, and they do a lot of blowing out. And when the train's rolling offensively, it's whether they're going to score, it's whether it's a field goal or a touchdown. You know what I mean? Every time they get the ball, they're going to move it 20, 30, 40 yards, wherever they are. Maybe it'll be Tucker, but if they could finish, I mean, they've had every problem. We're 10 weeks into this. They've had injury problems. They've had offensive problems. They've had turnover problems. They've had red zone problems. They've had a really good pass rush. they've been unstoppable defensively at various points, automatic 3-and-outs. They don't take the ball away much, but they take the ball away. And they don't give the ball away a lot, but man, when they give it away, it's awful. And the body of work, the notion that they've only been behind 28 minutes all year. Well, and somehow they wake up and here comes pissed off Joe Burrow, and they don't have Humphrey and they don't have Stanley, and they've got all these bad road trips. San Francisco looks like a hellhole on Christmas night. That does drink your eggnog early on Christmas Day, based on what I've seen there. So I just start looking at the schedule, like, and I know Jacksonville looks like a lamb now after laying down, but these are tough games, and we think of like Cleveland as being the cream puff, and they got their ass beat in the second half. They got pushed around. And that it was the lead of my column. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't yippee yip, and we're going to give up a weird interception, which they did. The sideways ball goes up in the air. Lamar can't make a tackle. Because I still believe if they make a tackle, the defense can come on the field and hold them to a field goal. Like, they've been good enough that I believe that every time the defense walks on the field, like, this could be a 3-and-out. Now, I don't ever feel like it's going to be a pick six. I don't feel like they have Ed Reed. I don't feel like it's that. But I feel like they'll pop a ball free. They'll, will come in and strip a sack. Something will happen. And, man, it hasn't happened in Showtime a couple of times. And to your point, it's been like quicksand. Once things start going bad, this Lamar pounding the ground, where's the leadership? I mean, and Roquan Smith, I love you, dude. You're but like, this can't be happening. Ray Lewis wouldn't take kindly to this.
I mean, it did happen from time to time back in the day. It did. We tend to block those moments out, but you're right. I mean, I can't argue with any of that. Although I will say, Odafe Owe provided the strip sack. I mean, everything you just mentioned, while true to varying degrees and talking about breakdowns all over the place, Odafe Owe stripped the ball out, and they were a fumble away from just under 3 minutes to go to basically sealing it there. They didn't make the big play when they needed to. I mean, whether it was Lamar, whether it was not being able to sustain a drive, not being able to get their running game going, the defense could not stop the run. So many missed tackles. I mean, that's something we talked about a good bit in the last 3-4 years, and we've talked so much about the way the NFL has changed and padded practices going away and the physicality of training camp going away. For understandable reasons, not a knock, but just the reality of where it is. But we had talked about their issues tackling. We hadn't talked about that all season. Their tackling was lousy on Sunday. I mean, missed tackle after missed tackle, whether you're talking about a Ford, and the big day that he had, letting Deshaun Watson get out a handful of times at some really critical junctures, run yards after the catch for a David Njoku, I mean, just a lot of that we hadn't really seen. I mean, again, the offense, we have seen the periods of inconsistency, the struggles at times with the offense. We'd seen that. It'd been choppy over the course of the first 10 games of the season. But the defense had largely been so consistent, so good, so dominant. I mean, if you want to point out the fourth quarter in Arizona, I mean, okay, that was still a game that felt more like garbage time than a meltdown in the making. If you want to talk about Marlon Humphrey giving up one play in Pittsburgh after they dropped passes and squandered all these opportunities on offense over and over and over, fine. I just pointed out a couple examples, but by and large, the defense had been outstanding, but they got pushed around. They got beat up at the line of scrimmage. They missed tackles. They missed Marlon Humphrey. I think it was very suspect seeing what the middle of their defense looked like with Marcus Williams being back on the field. And I'm not necessarily putting that all on him, but they had an operation the way it was going before with him sidelined and Geno Stone being out there that was very tight, very clean. And it wasn't tight and clean on Sunday. And again, I'm not putting that all on Marcus Williams, but
dude, that rugby play, how do they put that on over at the Castle Monday afternoon and show it to guys? And they got to go out and play on Thursday night. They got their ass kicked. So did Cincinnati. I mean, the whole world's going to be watching Thursday night if they can find the game on their computer. But I would say, man, the world's watching now, and this is they're expected to be better than this in a lot of ways. And I'm not here to tisk and shame. I mean, they got it all on them, but they're good enough to be better than this.
Yeah.
And look, my sidewaysness with the Harbaugh family, not nearly as sideways as like the Big Ten or Ohio State is at this point, or certainly Penn State after your guys. I always give that to you when you earn it. You can have your pet because you still have Pennsylvania plates, so I'll give that to you. But man, this is this is the type of stuff that gets coaches fired in other places where they don't have jobs for life, to your point. And while we're on firing coaches in the division, I mean, how about the Steelers? You know what I mean? Like, I don't, these teams aren't going away. And this division, for all of that, sitting at the coaches' breakfast in March, and it's the toughest division, it's the toughest division, it's the toughest division, certainly plays that way on a Sunday when you think of the Browns as being the worst team in the division, or do you think as the Steelers being the worst team in the division? You don't think of it being the Ravens, and certainly not the Bengals either when they're healthy. But all of a sudden, this thing becomes more of a 10-7, 11-6. All the notions of the 13-4s and the 14-3s, and the we're going to be a 1 seed and all of that. Especially Luke, and no offense, looking at their schedule, they're not running any table here. They're going to lose a couple more games, especially as constructed. Concerns on Stanley. They might lose Thursday night. Concerns on Stanley, concerns on Marlon Humphrey. Just in a general sense, they're to 3 and they're going to get to 5 or 6 with losses because they might be favored and whatnot. And they can go win every game, but they're not consistent enough. I mean, we're past the halfway body of work. They're not consistent enough to be great. They flash me some stuff, but I don't see, I'm not seeing the pedigree of great here. Over the body of work, I start to see these names of all these guys that have lost playoff games, and I see Tucker as a champion, but I'm wondering where the champion heart is when you're blowing games like this against teams that on paper, I mean, lost to Gardner Minshew, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like they making mistakes on special teams because they fair catch a ball with 2:03 left. You know what I mean? Just mental mistakes that cost them games and getting behind. But this thing on Sunday was different. They got beaten up. Like they got pushed around by the Cleveland Browns. Like that's disturbing to me. And they really have a chance to answer that on Thursday night. But these are the toughest of tough games to play, coming back from loss for both teams, because it's just going to be really ugly. It's going to be nothing we're going to want to judge on Friday morning at 6 a.m., Luke. It really isn't. I mean, I don't know how they're going to win on Thursday night, but they got to just mouthwash this one and get it out and go play football Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember you're never as great as you look when you're at your best, right? As great as they looked against Detroit, as great as they looked against Seattle, it's a reminder that they aren't that great. And on the flip side, I mean, everything you just said, they led for over 59 minutes on Sunday. I mean, I'm just saying, like you said, they got beat up. They led for over 59 minutes. And again, I'll go back, look at the Oweh play with just under 3 minutes to go, strip sack. If Justin Madubuike can fall on that ball instead of one of the Cleveland offensive linemen, it's probably over. It's probably over in that spot. Although, who knows? With the way things are going for them, they'd probably fumble on their first play. When the offense coming back on the field. But I want to go back to something you said because, gosh, it just resonated. You made the comment that they're too good to not be better than this, right? And that just really resonates because, again, they're 7-3. Even after this loss, they have the second best record in the AFC. Kansas City's the only team with a better record than them.
Every other team would love to be 7-3. Let's point that out.
So, right, yes. And again, I sound flippant saying this, but I really think the perception would be different if they lost in more conventional ways. Like if this had just been like a kind of a back and forth game, and they weren't leading by 2 scores in the fourth quarter the way they have so many times over the last couple of years, you'd look at the record and say, okay, they're not the best team in football, but they're still really good. And I mean, heck, they made the playoffs last year with Lamar Jackson missing the final 5 games. 2 years ago, they still almost made the playoffs with Lamar Jackson missing.
And they almost
the
beat the Bengals
games
without Lamar.
Right. So like you look at all the good, and when you have a game like this, you're shining a spotlight on the things that went poorly. There's no question about that. I mean, that's human nature. They're doing that in Cincinnati right now. They're doing that in Jacksonville after they got spanked. After they were feeling so good with the
Firing Bill
5-game winning
Belichick
streak.
in New England, right? I
Oh,
mean,
they stink this year.
on the plane on the way. My wife was at the game in Frankfurt with Neil, so like,
Right, but
I
I'm
mean,
talking about good teams though. I mean, the Patriots stink this year. I mean, they're awful. They Mac Jones isn't it. They stink. But your point's well taken. Anytime you lose, you're gonna emphasize the bad. You're gonna highlight the bad, and the world's coming to an end. That's not the case for the Baltimore Ravens. I still think this is a really good football team. I think this is a really good football team with the potential to be great. And we saw that over the last month. But for whatever reason, and going back to what you said, whether you're talking about leadership, whether you're talking about just needing to come through in crunch time, we talk about high leverage all the time in baseball, right? With late inning relievers. I mean, these are high leverage spots that the Ravens are just not coming through. And when things go sideways, boy, they really go sideways. And you just look at it and you say, how does that happen? I mean, uh, there's so many of these historical factoids that we've seen in terms of the blown loss, the blown leads and all these games that they were leading in the fourth quarter. I mean, we talked about this a lot early last year when they lost to Miami, when they lost to Buffalo, when they lost to the Giants up at the Meadowlands. But the stat that I saw that really resonated on Sunday, over the last 40 years, the least time spent trailing in the first 10 games of a season, and you cited the statistic, they were at 28 minutes, 46 seconds. The only teams bet with less time than that, trailing, the 84 Dolphins, which was a historic team until they lost to the 49ers in the Super Bowl, the 98 Broncos, who won the Super Bowl, the 1990 Giants, I trailed for only 43 minutes through their first 10 games. They won a Super Bowl. And the 2007 Patriots, who were undefeated until the Giants beat them in the Super Bowl.
See, I would have thought it was the '85 Bears. I would have put I'd have put the Rams team, the 2000 Rams team in there, '99 Rams, whatever that was. Like, I thought those teams were like they were
right.
speedboat rate. Like when I think of the teams that team was up 28-3 at halftime every week. They never fell behind. But even those teams were probably 12-2, and the Cowboys kicked their ass in week 4 or something, right? Like something happened to screw that up, right?
Sure. And keep in mind, those games you can win and be trailing in games.
Well, leading
right?
every minute of every game means weren't losing 3-0 for 6 minutes.
Right. But the point I was trying to make, those 4 other teams, they all started 10-0. The Ravens are 7-3. I mean, think about it. Look, I don't expect perfection. If they were 9-1 and this happened once, you would say, okay, look, you're not going to be the 72 Dolphins, right? I mean, things are going to happen. The other team tries too. But this has just happened way too many times the last couple of years. And again, it's so strange to say this and it sounds flippant, but if they just lost in a more conventional way, like think about how Kansas City lost to Denver a couple of weeks back. I mean, they woke up on the wrong side of the bed and they just stunk. I mean, they were really bad. That was an awful performance by the Chiefs. But that wasn't really a game that you're lamenting and say, well, we led by 2 scores and how did we blow this? I mean, they got out of bed the wrong way and just they were bad from Jump Street in that football game. If the Ravens lost a few games like that and they were 7-3 and you looked at them through that lens, there probably wouldn't be near the same amount of angst and panic. But it's what you said. They're too good. They've played too well for such long stretches to look at them and say they're 7-3 when the point differential, all these statistics, what little time they've trailed, how dominant their defense has been, how dominant their offense has been at times. And you look at it and say, how did you lose 3 football games? And then going back to what you just mentioned, because I'm glad you brought this up, talking about the Browns and the Steelers. Look, from a true talent standpoint, if we were talking about this in terms of baseball, if you're going to play a best of 7, if we had that in some hypothetical world in the NFL, I would take the Ravens and the Bengals to beat the Browns and the Steelers in a best of 7. I don't know, 4-2, 4-1, something like that. Worst comes to worst, at least in best of 4-3. But the difference now, as you're talking about this, and we've talked about this a lot with Pittsburgh, right? I think there's been a little more debate with Cleveland because their defense has been so great. There was just the question about the quarterback, right? And Deshaun Watson not being healthy and not being very good, quite frankly. Putting aside the off-field, baggage and perception. But the reality is, you look at the remaining schedule for the Steelers, you look at the remaining schedule for the Browns compared to the remaining schedule for the Ravens and the Bengals as well, and you look at it and say, okay, you can say all you want. You don't think the Browns are truly as good as a 6-3 record. That's fine.
Or
You
the
can say
Steelers keep winning by 3 points, right? Like literally
you can
beating
say
somehow.
right. You can say all you want that the Steelers aren't as good as 6-3. And by the way, I agree with that general notion. But at some point in time, those wins are banked in the same way that the Ravens, those 3 losses are banked. 10-0, well, they're not. That's not reality. They lost those games. So you start to look at that, and then you look at this game on Thursday night and how critical it is for the Ravens, and even more so for the Bengals. Bengals drop another one, it's going to be really tough for them to win the division, especially when you look at their schedule. At that point, you're talking about 5 losses, and you're saying, are they going to make it to the playoffs? Forget about the North when you're talking about the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Browns, and the wins they've banked. But are they going to make the playoffs? So it's so crucial for them. But you look at the Ravens, and I said it at the beginning of our conversation, I'll continue to say it. They go out and win on Thursday night, and they find a way, and they're the home team, so they're at an advantage in that way. As much as you look at this and say, okay, probably not going to have Ronnie Stanley, you're not going to have Marlon Humphrey. Who knows what the long-term prognosis is for them? John Harbaugh didn't have an update immediately after the game. Big shock there. But it really is a case of, if you win this, feel way better about yourself. And then you enter a stretch where you're going to play one game in about 3.5 weeks because you got the mini bye. You go to the Chargers the few days after Thanksgiving, and then you have your bye week. So you have a chance to get healthy. You have a chance to sit back and see what the rest of the division's going to do in the meantime. And then you can gear up for what's going to be a challenging schedule. No question about it. But if you lose this game and you fall to 2-3 in the division at that point in time, and then okay, we've got a West Coast game, and the Chargers is as weird as they are, and I think the ship has sailed for people buying the hype for them, but they're still capable of beating you, and they still can put up some points, especially if Herbert wakes
They're
up.
going to move the ball, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they can. I don't know if they'll move it against the Ravens per se, but we saw them move the ball against Detroit, for example. But you look at that game differently, and then you certainly look at the month of December and early January differently, because it's a tough schedule. It really is. So got to find a way to win this game. If you find a way to win this game Thursday night, as ugly as Sunday was, as frustrating as it was, as maddening as it was, it goes away pretty quickly. I mean, it does. But if you lose this game after dropping that on Sunday, boy, it's a lot of time to stew over 2 division losses. It's a lot of time to ponder just how challenging the remaining schedule is. And oh yeah, you look at that, you lose on Thursday night, Pittsburgh plays Cleveland on Sunday. Winner of that game then, under that scenario, is in sole possession of first place in the AFC North. So it's a lot on the line this week.
He just said that out loud, man. God, that's something, right?
I'm right on that, right? I didn't get much sleep Sunday night, but I mean that's how this plays out, and that's
all right, man.
I mean, there's a lot on the line this week, and I think mathematically for the division, and I think really big time psychologically for the Baltimore Ravens. Gosh, they really need to win Thursday night. If they don't, season's not over or anything crazy like that. But boy, the doubt just really starts to creep in much more when you consider just how great everyone was feeling just a few days ago here in town.
Yeah, at the risk of not sounding like the Debbie Downers around here, we're going to do an offensive take, a defensive take. We're going to come back, continue to break down this breakdown. Pretty good Tom Petty song, but not good to see on a Sunday afternoon for Ravens fans. Dennis is going to be around. Leonard's going to be around. I'm around. Spent the day at Fadley's on Friday doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with our friends at Window Nation and Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. Had Bill Cole. I had Matt Campbell from the Baltimore Convention Center. We debated deviled eggs. Luke, you a deviled eggs guy?
Oh, yeah. I love deviled eggs.
All of you are evil. That's all I'm going to say.
Wow, I guess that was the wrong answer.
Yeah, So we had a deviled eggs debate that we're going to pick up here for the holidays. And a lot of people put deviled eggs on their Thanksgiving. At least the hillbillies I grew up with in East Baltimore did. So some sauerkraut and kielbasa as well. We also had a really serious debate with Jeffrey Ratnow, who's a local developer, about everything that's going on at the Inner Harbor. I had Neil DeMoss on from Field of Schemes, checking back in with a lot of different issues at the Maryland Stadium Authority, the parity clause, and how all this is going to work. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Ravens when they win, when they lose. My column, this is up. You can read Luke's work at baltimorepositive.com.